This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Raymond Baker. He is an expert in money flows, so to speak. He also happens to know something about capitalism and democracy. The title of his book, Invisible Trillions: How Financial Secrecy is Imperiling Capitalism and Democracy and the Way to Renew Our Broken System. This is a wide conversation. We go off in many different directions. Where Raymond goes on illicit money flows and the negative aspects for society, most people will agree. However, we all know a topic like this can get highly political. There's not going to be 100% agreement, nowhere close, most likely. However, I salute Raymond for going down this topic thread. Not easy stuff, controversial topic. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Raymond Baker. As I think about your work, as I think about what you understand, what you have written about, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, but I want to start at the beginning here with a philosophical point and let you jump in. I seriously doubt on many of the topics that you cover that most people, if they understood what you understood, would disagree, whether they're on the left or the right. They would just say, let's clean up the bad actors and stuff. The part for me that becomes interesting is perhaps the nuanced perspective. If we don't have capitalism and democracy aligned, and this starts to fall apart, either side of it, this is not good. All that set up, here's what I really want to bring up. You've got more years under the belt than I do, but I'm really worried that we are going down this path where speech, you and I talking right now, that freedom might not be guaranteed into the future, that there could be review boards or regulatory operations that say, hey, Raymond, you can't say that. And it feels like to me that from a really big picture standpoint, if we start to have something like that, that's not good for capitalism. It's not good for democracy. You've been following things. You're an up-to-speed guy. So what's your perspective on this?
What I see is a lot of anger in America and other countries at the present time, and that anger is unfocused. Some people are angry at people of color or the homeless or people with political persuasions that differ from their own. Some people think that we ought to be able to say anything we want, and other people think that there ought to be some constraints on what is offered. To me, you're talking about a symptom of the problem, not the problem itself. To me, the problem itself is the decoupling between our economic and our political motivations, which is fostering anger and leading to those that want to say anything they want to say in the way they want to say it, and those that want to have some constraints on that language.
I hear what you're saying. Some people want to control and some people just want to say whatever. I guess the thing I fall back on is taking a few semesters of law back in the day. At least in America, we had this U.S. Supreme Court. There's a lot of case law and there's a lot of understandings, and we all know the basics. Can't yell fire in a crowded theater and stuff like that. I guess the reason I bring this up, though, if I'm looking at the title of your book, you're making a case financial secrecy, especially for a lot of bad actors, is not something good for capitalism. It's not good for democracy. But I start to wonder, do people start to get concerned about secrecy if they feel like they can't speak?
I haven't thought of it in those terms. The secrecy movement is basically about being able to shift your money in any way that you want to without anyone either telling you what to do with it or restricting what you do with it. This is undermining capitalism and democracy at the present. The financial secrecy system is a huge threat to us going forward. To relate financial secrecy to restrictions on speech, I'm not sure what that linkage is.
The opening salvo of this conversation, I was just, again, not trying to get into the meat of your particular book right now, but just to get your opinion on the lay of the landscape. Because here, obviously, you're very interested in capitalism, you're very interested in democracy, you're very interested in seeing both flourish. I was just opening it up here at the beginning to let you give some opinions on this. You and I are communicating right now. I just worry one day that might not be there without some approval.
I personally don't see that happening outside of authoritarian regimes. Authoritarian regimes certainly attempt to restrict free speech. This is true in a great many authoritarian regimes. In my thinking about it, the answer to assuring free speech is assuring democracy and not letting us drift toward authoritarianism, which we are doing at the present time. More countries are leaning authoritarian than at any other time in history. Democracy is under assault in many countries. If we lapse into authoritarianism, not only for the United States, but for other countries around the world, then you can bet free speech is going to be one of the things that is limited.
We now got aligned where I was trying to go. You hit the home run right there and how you stated that. I caught an article today about the mayor of London upset about some speech online, and he was proposing censorship, and he was proposing some review of social media and content online. What you bring up is really interesting, and I'll let you expound upon it some more, which is the idea that some Western countries are moving more towards an authoritarian perspective. This wasn't something you were thinking about when you were a younger man. I mean, America, for example, had a rock solid perspective. Right or left, people believe that America's got a democracy, got a republic. What do you think has been the shift to push us in that direction?
I'll give you a long answer. When I finished graduate school with an MBA in 1960, I didn't realize it at the time, but in retrospect, that was the high point of responsible capitalism, the 15-year period following the end of World War II. During that period, veterans retrained, investments soared, relations between labor and management were fairly good. Banks and corporations promoted balanced growth, consumption rose. It looked like that would continue. But then something happened. Beginning in the decade of the 1960s, capitalism began to take on a different motivation, not just profits, but also secrecy. And what we now have over the last half century or more is a secrecy system that enables capitalism to operate out of the control of democracy, out of the control of law. To me, that has been the most undermining aspect of broadly what is happening in the democratic capitalist system over these years.
Let me let you expand too, because I'm an entrepreneur. I've been one for a long time, 3 decades. And of course, when I think, well, I'll do things by the books, but I'm not looking to tell competitors, I'm not looking to tell the government anything more than I need to tell them. I'm just an individual running my world, so to speak. The distinction that I will let you run with is the difference between, let's say, some kleptocratic nations, some bad actors, terrorists, but then you also have regular people, regular corporations that don't want to provide too much information.
Let's take corporations as a starting point to your question. An American corporation is authorized by a state to exist, whether that state is Delaware or Maryland, California, or wherever. You have a state license to set up your corporation within that state. As a citizen of Maryland, I don't think that the state of Maryland should have the right to authorize a corporation to exist when I don't know who owns that entity. I have a right to know who owns that entity as a citizen of Maryland, but that's not the case at the present time. I don't have that right. Everybody thinks Delaware is the place where anonymous companies can exist or companies can exist with a minimum of regulation and so forth. Every other state in America has enabled corporations to be established anonymously. Now, this is beginning to change, but for decades, you could create a corporation without identifying who owns that corporation. So the owner could be a money launderer or a criminal or a terrorist financier or what have you. In my judgment, secret corporations should not exist with the approval of the state. I have a right to know who is doing business in my state. I'm not extending that to the point of saying that I have the right to know everything they're doing, but I certainly have the right to know who is authorized in my name to do business in my state. I emphasize this point, Mike, because disguised corporations have become the focal point, the key element in the financial secrecy system. And the United States has allowed every state to permit the establishment of secret corporations. As a result, the United States has more secret entities than any other country in the world, which is why so much dirty, stolen, criminal money comes into our economy preferentially over that of other economies. We have more financial secrecy entities in the United States than any other country.
Before we even get into some of the more detail behind this, the reason for this, I assume, is quite simple. Politicians have received funding and they want to get elected, and money from the right people helps them to get reelected. I mean, why else would this exist?
That's part of the answer. I wrote an earlier book called Capitalism's Achilles Heel. The first section of the book is subtitled, We Like the Money. It's that simple, Mike. We like the money that flows into our economy from other places, taking advantage of the secrecy that we offer.
What's your response to someone like me, though? Let's assume for a second, you don't know this to be true, but let's assume that I'm a good actor or somebody else is a good actor and they just would like that privacy. They don't want their neighbor or they don't want their competitor to know certain details. I hear your logic that as a citizen of the state of Maryland, you feel like you have the right to know. But I guess other people can make the argument, I'd like my privacy.
I draw a difference between privacy and secrecy. I would like my bank account to remain private, but this is not the same as saying it should be secret. If somebody with a name similar to mine creates a terrorist threat or undertakes a terrorist act, and constituted authorities needed to look at people's bank accounts with names similar to mine, I don't object to that. My privacy is not above security.
You go into a lot of detail that us mere mortals don't think about on a regular basis. You are pulling the curtain back on things that, again, as I said at the top, I suspect the vast majority of people, left or right, would agree with you because, look, nobody wants to find out that some LLC that's based at a local store in the strip mall is actually running some child prostitution ring, bringing people into America, and it's all disguised, and you can't find out who's running it. A lot of really great points. I was just bringing up, drawing that distinction between the good actors and the bad actors, which brings me to a sentence that I wrote down here in my notes after going through your world, your work. Who are the good guys these days?
I'm speaking strictly in the financial and economic realms. The good guys are the people that conduct themselves responsibly and according to the law. But that is not the majority of even multinational corporations. We have created over the last half century plus an entire financial secrecy system to facilitate the movement of dirty money, criminal money, tax evading money, and so forth into our economy. And I make the point that we have created this system. A lot of people think that this has been created by dealers and criminal syndicates and terrorist financiers and corrupt government officials. No, every single element of the financial secrecy system has been created by us Us meaning us in the richer Western countries, United States, Europe, to some extent, a couple of Asian countries, and so forth. We have created this system of financial secrecy, which is now undermining democracy and impacting capitalism.
Let me let you pull that apart a little bit more, the undermining. I just had the opportunity 2 weeks ago. I traveled to Singapore. For people that are not familiar, Singapore is a very nice place. It's very rich. Clearly, a lot of close by countries, probably primarily Indonesia, look at Singapore as a great place to bank. You could say this about many smaller countries around the world that have developed a, quote, tax haven status to where they're generally a very tiny country with a small population, but off the chart wealth. That's part of our global system these days, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but it's not just small island tax havens. To be honest, Singapore offers very little to the investor or depositor that doesn't also exist in the United States and Europe and UK and so forth. The financial secrecy system has become a global phenomenon. We now identify some 130 or 40 entities, countries, islands, enclaves, and so forth that provide financial secrecy. You can bring the dirtiest money that you can possibly generate, and you can find a place to put it. I've done business all over the world. I've been to 100 countries. I've known lots of corrupt government officials, corrupt people, dishonest people. I have never known one who had the slightest problem getting his or her money into a foreign bank account where it could be taken care of by some foreign interest. This has become a universal phenomenon now, and that is what is eating away at the fundamentals of capitalism and thereby impacting democracy.
So you have a longer time horizon to analyze this than a lot of people. If I'm not mistaken, you're 87, correct?
Is that what it is now? Yes.
A very spry 87. So we have this system that you are speaking about, that I'm speaking about, democracy. We want to see it do well. We want to see capitalism do well. So where are we falling down? The reason I brought up your age was the perspective. You got a longer time horizon to make an analysis. Whereas most people, they'll look at their current situation and they'll say, hey, I'm living in Singapore. It's nice living here. Oh, I'm in Vietnam. I'm in China. I'm in America. I'm in Japan. I'm in Europe. And people see their day-to-day life and they think to themselves, well, I've got a job or I don't have a job, or I started a company, or I made a product. Everyone's doing something. What I would like for you to make is the pitch to where you see things breaking down specifically to where the average person can really understand it. You make the case quite clearly that there's a lot of secrecy. There's a lot of bad money, dirty money flowing around the world. But for the average person, what makes them realize that this is progressing to a point to where it's going to impact them?
Excellent question. And we can talk about this all day.
Yeah.
Financial secrecy, as it has become normalized around the world, drives crime, it drives corruption, it drives terrorist financing. But there is something else that it drives that is even more fundamental and therefore of concern to everyone. And that is it drives inequality. Money is flowing to the top, not available to the middle class. I mentioned 1960, the year that I graduated from my MBA studies. At that time, in America, the difference in earnings between the CEO and the average worker was about 20-1. Can you imagine what it is today? More than 350-1. Every single employee of a decent-sized corporation knows that he or she is living a life that is considerably less well-to-do than that of the CEO. Every single one knows that the CEO is a multimillionaire, and I'm sitting here perhaps living paycheck to paycheck. The greatest driver of the financial secrecy system is it drives money from the bottom to the top. Yes, it drives money from corrupt to legitimate. It drives money from criminal to respectable. But the greatest impact that it has is that it drives money from the bottom to the top. We have had a massive separation between rich and poor, and not only in the United States, but across the world over the last half century. And the financial secrecy system is the key element that enables this.
I'm sure, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm guessing it's some very small percentage of the global population controls 80% of the wealth, something like that. I'm guessing less than 100 people. If we were to really unpack the conversation, when we talk about inequality and the CEO, hey, look, I salute that Jeff Bezos took a risk. He made Amazon. He got rewarded. Maybe it's too much of a reward. Maybe some people say it's not my business. But when we talk about inequality, it's really a very small number of people. We're talking hundreds that are controlling vast swaths of the world's wealth. That'd be a fair statement, right?
Yes, it is a fair statement, but they don't account for the whole of the problem. Yes, the richest 1% of the world have accumulated wealth that is very close to equaling the remaining 99% of the world. But that small group, which some people focus on, is certainly not the whole of the picture. The top 10% of the world have 83% of global wealth. So it's not just a problem of the top 1% or the top 1/10 of 1%. It's a larger group of the top 10 or 20% that have vastly more wealth than the rest of the world. We're dealing with a world right now where 83% of the wealth belongs to the top 10%. Going back to politics for a minute, an awful lot of wealthy people around the world, whether they're in the 1% or the 10% or what have you, find authoritarianism an attractive means of keeping their wealth. That's what they think, and they're dead wrong. You want to go through history and find the dictatorial regimes, authoritarian regimes supported by the wealthy who have subsequently fallen apart. This has happened throughout history. Authoritarianism is the risk that is derived from massive inequality. Inequality is driven by a financial secrecy system that says, I can get wealthy and you don't know how I'm doing it, and I don't care how it's accomplishing, and I'll derive my politics in a way that facilitates the maintenance of my wealth. My book is about the linkage between democracy and capitalism, and my point is where these two pillars of our existence were, at the time I finished school, operating in sync. These two pillars of our system are now becoming decoupled, no longer operating in sync. And if this continues, primarily with the responsibility of a flawed capitalist system, it will bring down the democratic capitalist system and result in authoritarianism.
I have no doubt that if there is too much inequality, the pitchforks will eventually come out. Let me offer a side tangent from a guy who spent his first 35 years living 15 miles outside Washington, D.C., who still has family in that area. Now, that is a fascinating area. I think you know something about that area. 6 of the top 10 wealthiest counties in America surround D.C. That wasn't the case when I was a teenager. It's a situation now where I can think of my hometown in Virginia, 16,000 square foot parcels of land went in the early 90s for a couple $100,000, now are going for close to $2 million. I don't think what I'm bringing up is yet at the scope of what you're talking about, but it's very frustrating to see not only do you have the illicit streams of capital flowing around the world, but then you've also got this situation where, it's back to my earlier point, who do you trust? Well, how do we start to solve this? And I say, well, if we're going to start to solve this, then we got to go to DC. Well, I know what's in DC. It's a lot of people that know they've got really good jobs and they know their real estate's gone up. There's not a lot of movement these days. You see where I'm going on all this? You've walked into a minefield and you know this. I know you've made it a lot of your life's work, but it's a hell of a minefield, isn't it?
Yes, it is. We're dealing with the sustenance of the democratic capitalist system. Some people say, oh, it's not a system, it's just two different things. I disagree with that. Democracy and capitalism are in a systemic linkage. And where one falters, it hurts the other. Let me be a little bit tangential here. A lot of people see the political discontent in America at the present time and attribute this to all sorts of social factors. I focus on the economic content in the discontent in America. And I said to you earlier that every employee of a corporation knows that the boss is a multimillionaire and that individual may be living paycheck to paycheck. It drives discontent. An awful lot of people in America believe in the big lie that the election was stolen. I take a bit of a different take on that issue. I think many of those people who subscribe to the big lie have come to the conclusion that it wasn't the election that was stolen. There's just been too many court cases indicating that the elections were fair, but still subscribe to the big lie because somebody has lied to these people. Somebody has tried to convince these people that capitalism is going to give them a fair share of prosperity. This has not been the case over the past half century, and it's catching up with us. There was a brilliant study done recently that showed that vast swaths of middle America will not reach the standards of living of their parents. There is no more obvious comparison to your status than to look at your parents. And if you think, I can't even do as well as my parents did, then you're going to find something to be angry about. And your anger may be directed to election lies. And if that one doesn't work, then you'll direct that anger to other lies. And the basic lie is that the capitalist system will give you a fair measure of economic prosperity. That has become a lie.
The word fair is a very tough word, as you and I know. There's not many things in life that are fair. As you took it to that side tangent, my audience is probably 50-50. They probably straddle both sides of the aisle. But I think I would be amiss to say that I think it's been unusual for the last couple of years, people so focused on whether a particular election was real or not, or valid or not. I've seen this from both parties over the years. One of the reasons that I think some people fixated on this particular election would probably be the prior 4 years, because the first 2 years of his administration, President Trump's, the first 2 years were all about that he was a Russian asset, and that didn't pan out. That overreach caused people to then overreach. And I think that's what's really ongoing in society right now. It's an overreach. It's like there's an acceleration to see what we can all do, either side of the aisle, to accelerate to a point to say anything for political power. That seems to be a truism. I don't think it's one side or the other. I think both sides are essentially going to say anything to get political power.
I think you're right. The polarization is so severe that people will say anything to get elected and to have power. The polarization will continue as long as the economic disparity continues. I defy you, Michael, to bring anybody on your program that can make the case of how you strengthen democracy amidst rising inequality. I don't think that case can be made by anyone. This is why I stress the economic component in our political discontent. I don't think we can solve our problems unless we address the economic disparity and the causes of that economic disparity that now permeate our society and dozens of other societies as well.
Let me pick your mind, though, on a topic near and dear to me, something that I've learned a lot more about in the last 10 years, especially since I'm in that part of the world today. I would make the argument that across Asia, whether the country is a stated democracy or a socialist country, there's a handful of socialist countries in Asia, they're all one-party states in Asia. Singapore's one party, Japan's one party, China's one party, Vietnam's one party, Korea. It's not this heavily divided two-party system like we have in the States. You've lived in a lot of different places, but there's a lot of capitalism in Asia. I would make the argument that almost any Asian city I can go to, big ones, feel more alive, more commerce, more energy. They know they don't have a backstop from their governments. There's no social welfare programs. The attitude is just, man, I've got to go. I've got to hustle every day. What is your perspective on that? Because it's right there in your subtitle, talking about capitalism, democracy. But there's a lot of capitalism and one-party states around the world that do quite well.
A number of Asian countries are either authoritarian or semi-authoritarian and yet let capitalism thrive. You have extensions from Singapore on one side of the equation to perhaps Myanmar on the other side of the equation, where the military controls both the politics and the economy and enriches itself hugely.
I would agree with you on that one. I would say of the countries that I've been in Asia, probably the least capitalistic one I've felt to be in is Myanmar.
Yeah. And I, quite frankly, blast the hell out of the military regime of Myanmar in my book. It's inexcusable.
But beautiful place, beautiful people.
Yes, I sympathize with their plight. I don't know of a strongly authoritarian regime that exists where people in that political situation are content to keep their money in the country. The biggest exporter of illicit money is China, by far, dwarfs everybody else. Russia is second. But the wealthy and Chinese are sending their money out of the country as fast as they can. Xi Jinping knows this and is trying to take some measures to curtail that, but so far not effectively. China is the biggest exporter of illegal capital of any country in the world. China is also one of the biggest perpetrators, if not the biggest perpetrators, of crime in the world. You wouldn't believe it, but Chinese gangs have taken over money laundering in Central America. They've taken the business away from Central Americans who were money launderers. Chinese triads are now doing this in competition and defeating the competition in the laundering of drug money. People eventually react against a harshly authoritarian regime. That's what happens, and they move their money out.
It is a great point about moving the money out, because you do hear about that quite a bit these days. I would be amiss not to offer a perspective. I have some Chinese friends. I have a good American friend who lived in China for a long time, and we always try to have debates about these issues. I don't think that anyone in China would probably doubt what you just said about money leaving the country. But the Chinese might also say, hey, hold on, you guys over there in America with your capitalism and your democracy, you guys keep running around the world in the last 40, 50 years, initiating wars that might not have needed to be initiated. Everyone's got their self-interest and everyone's got their perspective. A lot of people will say, even though China's system might not be a system that I want to live under, or you, has any place ever brought more people out of poverty in the last 50 years? The world's a terribly complicated place with all kinds of perspectives, as you know.
I agree. And yes, China has brought more people out of poverty than any other country ever. And that has been a terrific accomplishment. On the other hand, China has also had the fastest separation between rich and poor that I have ever seen. And I think statistically, the fastest separation between rich and poor that has ever occurred. And the rich, they're taking their money out. A lot of them are taking their money into foreign holdings. Economic prosperity has to be managed for the benefit of all. That's part of what I'm saying. That's not completely the case in China. It's not the case in the United States, not the case in a lot of other countries as well. I go back to my point. Capitalism and democracy, let's use different words if we want to. Market economy and political affairs need to operate in sync, whether that is capitalism and democracy or socialism. Economics and politics need to operate in sync for the benefit of the people, and that most definitely is not what's happening at the present time in a great many countries.
Let me take it back to America. Let me leave Asia for a moment. you've just won, let's say, a governorship or a Senate seat. You have this perspective on these many issues, the title, Invisible Trillions, the wealth flows around the world. You make a good argument that this is not helping the vast majority of people and it's holding some people down. So you assume a political power position. Beyond philosophy, what would be something that you would do from a policy perspective that could begin us down the path to get you to the desired perspective that you might imagine? What would be some of those top steps that you could take that it's not going to be overnight for the vast majority of people in America that are so far away from the highest wealth? What steps would you take as a political leader?
Let me take a perspective from our national government rather than from a state government. A state government would have more trouble with it than a national government. The key to changing the motivation that has arisen within capitalism, the motivation for secrecy, the key to changing that is to require greater transparency and accountability in capitalist operations. If I had my wish list for the United States, I would take a number of steps. First thing I do is get rid of disguised corporations. As I said earlier, there are more of them in the United States than any other. They don't have a right to exist without me knowing who's owning those businesses, owned by money launderers or terrorist financiers or what have you. I'd get rid of disguised corporations. The United States has taken some steps in that direction in the last year or two, but it's a hesitant approach and needs to be a much more encompassing approach. Another thing I would do, I would require publicly held corporations to report their dealings of every one of their entities. They don't have to do that now. They can report their global results, but they don't have to tell you what they're doing in a lot of subsidiaries around the world. And that's not right. Again, if it's a public corporation and it exists under the laws of the state or the nation, then we have a right to know what they're doing. They don't have a right to go into Myanmar and do business and participate in money laundering and corruption with government officials and not even report what their subsidiaries are doing. No, if you're a public corporation, make public what you're doing. Another thing I would do, Mike, specifically focused on the inequality question, it's time to put workers on boards of directors. Some other countries have done this. Germany has done it. It's time for that voice to be heard at the board level. That's not the case in the United States at the present time. It should be. I don't know how you address the problem of inequality unless those who are unequal are represented in the decision-making bodies. There are a lot of other specific steps that I would take. Basically, the overarching framework is capitalism has to operate with a greater degree of accountability and transparency than exists at the present time. And there are a lot of elements that go into accomplishing that.
I got one final question, which is a follow-up based on something you just said. You brought up the idea of having workers have representation on the company board. How would that unfold in a current situation right now, for example, where across the board Silicon Valley is cutting wide swaths of workers? Whether it's Amazon or Twitter or Facebook, tens of thousands of people are being cut. Business decisions, they realize that, or they think a hard rain is a-coming, and they're saying, hey, this isn't working. We can't go forward like this. How would that unfold if workers are on the board, the very workers that might have to be cut?
I don't see any reason to believe that workers on a board of directors are not interested in the maintenance of the corporation's existence. I think they would very much vote in favor of that. My point is, I don't think workers on the board would be opposed to cuts where necessary, but I think they would be opposed to the chief executive officer making 350 times the amount that they're making. So I think they would make a positive contribution toward reconciling the vast disparities in income that exist within corporations. And to me, that is a very decided plus.
You have got so many topic areas we could go down. And as we said earlier in this conversation, we could probably carry this conversation on for a very long time. We probably would find ourselves in agreement on the vast majority of things. I would probably push you on some things. We might disagree on some things. But as the owner of a corporation, I have to imagine myself that if employees were to be on my small board and were offering feedback, I don't think I'd want to hear their feedback if I'm cutting their check. I know you're speaking at scale in much larger companies, I understand. But you bring up great topics. If anything, you force the food for thought. You force the conversation. And that's all we can do today. And I think you do a great job of bringing up a perspective that people are not thinking about. And of course, your book is a lot more detailed than we went into today. I just want to get the broad brush strokes here, get the conversation flowing. The book, Invisible Trillions, How Financial Secrecy is Imperiling Capitalism and Democracy and a Way to Renew Our Broken System. Again, you lay it out. You've got a great perspective. You got lots of experience. You're going to have some people that are going to be like immediately 100% on your side. You're going to have other people that you might have swayed some. You're going to have some people who are going to say, no way, I'm not listening to Raymond. I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of reactions. Is there a website you would like to direct people to where they can find you if they want to reach out?
The author's website will go live shortly, and we will continue to post onto that website. Just a little bit of background to that, Michael. I have done a great deal of economic investigative work around the world in my career. I have normally been a person that is rather more circumspect than public, so I have been cautious about getting out in front on a lot of issues. I'm doing so now. And I would say one thing about the book for your audience, and that is that I have written this to be as clear as possible. There's a fair amount of economics in the book. I've got some charts and graphs in the book. Almost all of them just have, let's say, 2 lines in the chart. The line for CEO pay going up to 350, the line for workers' pay staying down at much more modest levels. In other words, I've written this book to be as easily graspable as it can possibly be in order to make the points that I'm making. A further word about that, the approach that I have taken in this book is informed by what happened in the climate change agenda. Scientists and researchers and experts knew and wrote about what was going on for 30 years before it became understood in the popular arena, before it was understood by the average person. I'm trying to shorten that 30-year period by making what I'm saying as accessible as possible to everyone. I don't want us to take 30 years to think about this. I want us to address this problem soon.
Well, I hope I gave you a good sounding board and good devil's advocate today. I hope you enjoyed.
Enjoyed it greatly.
Raymond, you have a good day, and we will talk again in the future.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.